The silence of my house in the Boston suburbs had become a presence of its own since my husband, Richard, passed away 3 years ago. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a heavy one, filled with the ghosts of laughter and the echoes of conversations that had ended mid-sentence. At 71, I found myself adrift in a sea of well-appointed memories. My days were structured: gardening, the library's book club, weekly calls with my son Mark, but they lacked a certain music. Mark, ever the pragmatist, saw my life as a settled affair. He managed my portfolio, advised me on property taxes, and spoke of my home not as a place where he grew up, but as the primary asset. He meant well, I told myself, but his concern always seemed to have a dollar sign attached. It was at the book club, while dissecting a particularly dense historical novel, that the music started again. His name was Arthur. He was a retired history professor from Tufts, with eyes the color of faded denim and a laugh that seemed to start in his toes. He disagreed with my take on the motivations of Catherine the Great, and he did so with such wit and gentle respect that I found myself captivated. He wasn't loud or imposing. He was thoughtful, his arguments woven with obscure facts and a genuine passion for the past. After the meeting, he walked me to my car, and we discovered a shared love for classical music, specifically the complex cello suites of Bach. Our first date, as he charmingly called it, was to a performance by Yo-Yo Ma with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Sitting beside him in the velvet darkness of Symphony Hall, I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the heated building. It was the simple, profound joy of shared experience. In the weeks that followed, we were inseparable. We took long walks through the Arnold Arboretum, our conversations meandering from the politics of the Roman Empire to the best way to prune rose bushes. He never spoke of money, his or mine. He spoke of ideas, of art, of the book he was slowly writing on the cultural impact of the spice trade. He had a modest pension and a small condo in Cambridge, and he seemed utterly content. For the first time since Richard's passing, my house felt less like a museum and more like a home. The silence was replaced with the sound of Arthur reading poetry aloud in the living room, his voice a rich baritone that made the words feel new. He wasn't replacing Richard. He was building something new in the spaces that had been left fallow. I was happy, truly, deeply happy, and I was naive enough to think my son would be happy for me. I called Mark and his wife, Jennifer, and invited them for dinner the following Saturday. "There's someone special I'd like you to meet," I'd said, my voice bright with an optimism I hadn't felt in years. The air in my dining room, usually filled with the comfortable aroma of a roast chicken, felt thick with unspoken judgment. I'd spent all day preparing. The good silver was polished, the crystal glasses gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, and a lemon herb chicken was resting on the counter. Arthur, dapper in a navy blazer, had brought a lovely bottle of French Bordeaux and a bouquet of lilies for Jennifer. He was the picture of a charming guest, complimenting my home, engaging Jennifer in a light-hearted chat about her work in marketing, and even trying to find common ground with Mark. But Mark was a fortress. He sat stiffly in the chair Richard used to occupy, his arms crossed, his smile a thin, surgical line. "So, Arthur," Mark began, forgoing any pretense of small talk as I served the soup. "Mom tells me you were a professor. At Tufts?" "That's right," Arthur replied pleasantly, unfolding his napkin. "Taught European history for 35 years. A wonderful career. I miss the students, but I don't miss the faculty meetings." He chuckled, a warm, easy sound. Mark didn't join in. He just nodded slowly, his eyes narrowed as if he were auditing Arthur's life. "History, huh? Doesn't pay like a business degree, I imagine. Do you have a good pension plan from the university?" The question landed on the table with a thud. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. Jennifer shot Mark a quick, nervous glance, but he ignored it. Arthur, to his immense credit, didn't flinch. "It's adequate for my needs," he said, his tone even. "I was never in it for the money, Mark. I was in it for the love of the subject." "A love of the subject," Mark repeated, tasting the words as if they were foreign. "Right." He proceeded to pepper Arthur with a relentless series of questions, each one more intrusive than the last. He asked about Arthur's condo. Did he own or rent? He asked about his retirement savings, his late wife's estate, his long-term health. It wasn't a conversation. It was a deposition. I tried to steer the topic to safer waters, bringing up a recent museum exhibit, a new film, anything to stop the relentless drilling. But Mark would always circle back, framing his invasive questions with a thin veneer of filial concern. "I just want to make sure Mom is in good hands," he'd say, looking at me with an expression that was supposed to be loving but felt proprietary. By the time I served dessert, a homemade apple pie that suddenly felt like ashes in my mouth, the atmosphere was glacial. Arthur, ever the gentleman, remained poised and gracious, but I could see the subtle strain around his eyes. He had been invited into my home only to be treated like a suspect in a lineup. As I walked them to the door, Mark pulled me aside, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Mom, we need to talk. Alone. I'll call you tomorrow." He didn't hug me. He didn't even look at Arthur. He just steered Jennifer toward their Lexus, a man on a mission, leaving me and Arthur standing in the cold silence of my doorway. The beautiful evening I had envisioned had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by my own son's cruel suspicion. The phone rang at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, as I knew it would. Mark was nothing if not punctual. I was in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking, the previous night's humiliation still churning in my stomach. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, steeling myself. "Mom," he began, dispensing with pleasantries. "I'm just going to be blunt. I did some digging on this Arthur fellow." "You did what?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. The idea of my son running a background check on my guest, on my friend, was appalling. "Just a public records search, nothing crazy. I have to look out for you," he said, his tone that of a patient man explaining a complex but necessary procedure to a child. "He owns a small condo in Cambridge, like he said, but it's mortgaged. He has no other significant property holdings. His pension is modest at best. Mom, you have to see what's happening here." I gripped the phone receiver, my knuckles turning white. "What exactly do you think is happening, Mark?" There was a pause, and then he said the word, the ugly, insulting word that would change everything between us forever. "He's a gold digger, Mom. It's the oldest trick in the book. A charming older man with no assets of his own finds a lonely widow with a paid-off house and a healthy portfolio. Do you really think a man like that is interested in you for your scintillating conversation about Catherine the Great?" The condescension dripped from every syllable. He wasn't just insulting Arthur, he was insulting me, my intelligence, my desirability, my very capacity to be loved for who I was. A cold rage, clear and sharp, sliced through my shock. "How dare you?" I whispered. "How dare you speak to me that way? You know nothing about him, and you certainly know nothing about my feelings." "I know the bottom line," he shot back, his voice rising. "I know what Dad worked his entire life to build. This house, the investments, that's our family's legacy. It's my job to protect it and to protect you from predators who want to get their hands on it." "It is not a legacy for you to protect, Mark. It is my life and my money," I retorted, my voice gaining strength. "Richard and I built this life together for us. We built it to live in, not to be a prize for you to inherit. Arthur is a kind, intelligent, wonderful man who brings me immense happiness, something I haven't felt in years. And you, in one evening, decided to put a price tag on it. I'm being realistic." "You're being emotional," he said, the classic dismissal of a man who cannot win an argument on its merits. "You're vulnerable, Mom. You need to end this before he gets his hooks in any deeper. Think about what you're putting at risk." The call ended with him hanging up in frustration when I refused to agree. I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone still buzzing with a dead dial tone in my hand. He hadn't said, "I love you," or "I'm worried about you." He'd said, "Think about what you're putting at risk." He had laid his cards on the table, and they were all marked with dollar signs. The line had been drawn, not by me, but by him. 2 days of strained silence passed. I didn't call Mark, and he didn't call me. I spent the time with Arthur, and his gentle presence was a soothing balm on the wound my son had inflicted. We went for a drive along the coast, stopping for fried clams in Essex, and for a few hours I could almost forget the ugliness. But it was always there, a dark cloud on the horizon. The storm broke on Wednesday afternoon. I was in the garden, trimming the deadheads from my hydrangeas, when Mark's Lexus pulled into the driveway. He got out of the car, his face set like concrete. He hadn't called to say he was coming. "Mom, we need to finish our conversation," he said, walking onto the lawn. He wasn't dressed in his usual suit. He wore slacks and a polo shirt, an attempt at casualness that his rigid posture completely betrayed. "I thought we said everything that needed to be said, Mark," I replied, not putting down my pruning shears. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when you know a confrontation is inevitable. "No, you didn't listen," he said, stepping closer. "I spoke with our family attorney this morning." My blood ran cold. "Just a preliminary chat," he added quickly, seeing the look on my face. "About options. About protecting assets when a parent enters a questionable relationship. We talked about things like a durable power of attorney." The shears in my hand felt suddenly heavy. Power of attorney. He wanted to take legal control of my life, of my finances, because he disapproved of my boyfriend. He was treating me not as his mother, but as a failing asset that needed to be managed. "You have no right," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I have every right. I'm your son," he insisted, his voice cracking with a frustration that was morphing into desperation. "I will not stand by and watch this stranger, this parasite, undo everything Dad and I have worked to secure. He's brainwashing you, Mom. Can't you see it?" "The only person I see trying to control me is you, Mark," I said, finally setting the shears down on the stone bench. I looked him directly in the eye. "Arthur has never once asked me for a penny. He has never once suggested I change my will or my investments. The only person who talks about my money is you. The only person who sees me as a walking bank account is you." He threw his hands up in exasperation. "This is pointless. He's got you completely turned around." He took a deep breath, his expression hardening into one of grim finality. It was the look of a man about to deliver an ultimatum. "Okay, Mom, here it is. It's him or it's us. It's your family. If you continue to see this man, you can consider your relationship with me, with Jennifer, with your future grandchildren, over. We will not be a party to you destroying your life and our family's future. The choice is yours." He stood there, arms crossed, waiting for my compliance. He truly believed he held all the power, that the threat of familial exile would be enough to bring me to heel. In his mind, he was saving me, but all he was doing was showing me, with brutal clarity, that his love was entirely conditional. After Mark left, a profound and hollow sadness settled over me. I walked through my quiet house, touching the frames of family photos. Mark's high school graduation, his wedding day. The man in those pictures, the smiling, happy son I had raised, seemed like a stranger. The man who had just stood on my lawn, threatening to sever our family ties over his own greed, was the reality. I called Arthur. My voice must have betrayed my distress, because he was at my door within 20 minutes, his face etched with concern. I told him everything, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of hurt and anger. I told him about the power of attorney, about the ultimatum. "He wants to cut me off, Arthur," I finished, my voice breaking. "My own son." Arthur sat beside me on the sofa, taking my hand in his. His touch was firm and steadying. He listened without interrupting, his denim blue eyes full of empathy. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I am so terribly sorry that I am the cause of this. The last thing I ever wanted was to come between you and your family. If you think it would be better for you to step back from me, I would understand. It would break my heart, but I would understand." He was giving me an out. He was willing to sacrifice his own happiness for my peace, a stark contrast to my son, who was willing to sacrifice my happiness for his financial security. And in that single selfless moment, my decision crystallized. The path forward became not just clear, but necessary. The fog of sadness began to burn away, replaced by the fire of righteous conviction. I looked at this kind, honorable man who was willing to let me go for my own good. And then I thought of my son, who was willing to cast me aside for his. The choice wasn't between Arthur and Mark. It was between conditional love and unconditional love. It was between being an asset and being a person. "No," I said, my voice firm, "I am not stepping back from you, Arthur. You are the best thing to happen to me in a very, very long time." I turned to face him fully, my hand still in his. Mark has made his choice. He has chosen to see me as a vault that needs guarding, not as a woman who deserves happiness. So, I'm going to make my own choice. I took a deep breath, a sudden, thrilling sense of my own power surging through me. Arthur, I said, looking directly into his surprised eyes, will you marry me? A slow smile spread across his face, lighting up his features. Eleanor, he breathed, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I thought you'd never ask. He didn't ask about Mark, or the money, or the consequences. He just looked at me as if I were the only person in the world. In that moment, I wasn't a widow, a mother, or an estate to be managed. I was just Eleanor. And I was choosing my own future. We didn't want a spectacle. Our union wasn't for anyone else. It was for us. 3 days later, on a crisp, sunny Friday morning, Arthur and I drove into Boston. We went to City Hall, a grand old building of marble and granite that had witnessed a million such humble beginnings. We were dressed simply, I in a cream-colored silk dress and Arthur in his favorite tweed jacket. Our only witnesses were 2 strangers we pulled from the hallway, a young couple there to get a building permit, who seemed delighted to be part of our story. Standing before a justice of the peace in a small, sunlit office, we exchanged simple vows. There were no photographers, no lavish bouquets, no tearful family members. There was only the quiet sincerity in Arthur's voice as he promised to love and honor me, and the unshakable certainty in my own heart as I did the same. When he slipped a simple gold band onto my finger, it felt more significant than any diamond. It was a symbol of a new life, a declaration of independence. We celebrated with lunch at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, sharing a bottle of Prosecco and a plate of pasta, laughing like teenagers. For those few hours, the world consisted of only the 2 of us. But I had one more stop to make. That afternoon, I had an appointment with my estate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, whom I'd worked with for years. I had called her the day after my proposal. Arthur waited in the lobby, giving me my privacy. I sat across the polished mahogany desk from Miss Albright, the newlywed glow still warming my skin. "You're married?" she asked, a carefully neutral expression on her face. "Congratulations, Eleanor. This is unexpected." "It was a sudden decision, but a very considered one," I said calmly. "I need to make some significant changes to my will and my entire estate plan, effective immediately." She folded her hands on the desk. "Eleanor, you know I must ask. Are you making this decision of your own free will? Are you feeling pressured in any way?" "The only pressure I've been under has come from my son, Mark," I stated plainly. "And it is in direct response to his pressure that I am making these changes." I then laid out my instructions, my voice unwavering. I wanted to revoke the existing will, which named Mark as the primary beneficiary and executor. I wanted to draft a new one. In it, my husband Arthur was to be my sole heir. The house, the investment portfolio, the savings, every last cent. I also instructed her to draft a new durable power of attorney and a healthcare proxy, naming Arthur in both instances. Miss Albright listened, taking meticulous notes. When I was finished, she looked at me over the top of her glasses. "This will effectively disinherit your son entirely. You understand that?" "I understand it perfectly," I said. "He accused my husband of being a gold digger. He gave me an ultimatum, my family or my happiness. He made it clear that his love for me is tied to his inheritance. So I am removing the inheritance from the equation. Let's see what's left." She nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even approval, in her eyes. She drew up the documents. I read each one carefully, the black and white legal text representing a profound shift in my life. Then, with a steady hand, I signed my name, Eleanor Vance Halloway, on every page. Each stroke of the pen was a small act of liberation, severing the chains of filial expectation and greed. I was no longer a legacy to be protected. I was the architect of my own. Our honeymoon was everything Mark's world was not. We didn't fly to a gated resort to sit by a pool. We booked a transatlantic crossing on the Queen Mary 2. For 7 days, we were suspended between the old world and the new, surrounded by the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The rhythm of the ship was our only clock. We spent our days reading in deck chairs, bundled in blankets against the sea breeze, attending lectures on maritime history, and dancing to a live orchestra in the grand ballroom each evening. Arthur, with his boundless curiosity, was in his element. He looked at me with such unabashed love and admiration that I felt myself growing younger, more vibrant, with each passing day. He loved me for my mind, my spirit, my laugh. The woman my son had dismissed as a vulnerable, emotional fool was, to Arthur, the most fascinating woman in the world. On our 5th evening at sea, the sun was setting in a spectacular blaze of orange and purple. We were on our private balcony, a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket beside us. The air was cool and tasted of salt. This was the moment I had planned. Earlier that day, I had prepared a package to be sent via international courier from our first port of call in Southampton, England. It was addressed to Mark. Inside the crisp FedEx envelope were 2 items. The first was a simple, elegant wedding announcement. It featured a lovely candid photo Arthur had taken of me on the deck, my face turned to the sun, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on my face. Beneath it, the text read, "Mr. Arthur Halloway and Mrs. Eleanor Vance are delighted to announce their marriage." I had deliberately omitted my previous married name, a small but significant declaration of my new beginning. The second item was a letter. It wasn't from me. It was on the official letterhead of Miss Albright's law firm. It was a cold, formal notification. It stated in precise legal terms that as of the date of my marriage, all previous estate planning documents had been rendered null and void. It informed him that a new last will and testament had been executed, naming my husband, Arthur Halloway, as the sole beneficiary and executor of my entire estate. It also informed him that all powers of attorney had been transferred. There was no emotion, no explanation, just the brutal, unassailable finality of the law. I had enclosed a small handwritten note of my own on a simple postcard of the ship. It read, "Dear Mark, you were so worried about a gold digger getting my money. I decided to make it official. You turned my love into a business transaction, so I've concluded our business. Your loving mother, Eleanor." As I clinked my champagne flute against Arthur's, the setting sun painting the sky, I imagined Mark standing in his pristine, minimalist foyer, opening that envelope. I imagined the color draining from his face as he read the lawyer's letter, the cold fury replacing his smug certainty. He had feared losing his inheritance. His fear, and the greed that fueled it, had just become a self-fulfilling prophecy of his own making. The sea breeze felt like freedom. It has been a year since our wedding. Life with Arthur is a quiet symphony of shared joys. We sold my large suburban house, the primary asset that had caused so much grief, and bought a beautiful smaller home with a sprawling garden in a coastal town in Maine. The air here is clean, the people are kind, and the pace of life is dictated by the tides. Arthur is finally writing his book on the spice trade at a large oak desk overlooking the sea, and I have taken up watercolor painting, something I always wanted to do. Our home is filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the scent of Arthur's baking bread, the sound of classical music, and constant, easy laughter. We have inherited a life of peace, funded by the very assets my son sought to control. The aftermath with Mark was exactly as I'd anticipated, a predictable storm of rage followed by a desperate calm. First came the deluge of furious texts and voicemails, accusing me of betrayal, of insanity, of being manipulated by a con artist. He threatened legal action, to contest the will, to have me declared incompetent. Miss Albright handled it all with professional detachment, informing him that any such challenge would be fruitless, as I was of perfectly sound mind and body when I made my decisions, a fact she and several other professionals could attest to. Then, after a few months of silence, the tone shifted. The angry messages were replaced by pleading ones, short texts that said, "Mom, please call me." Voicemails from Jennifer, her voice saccharine, suggesting we all get together and talk this through. They didn't miss me. They missed the safety net I represented. They saw their future, the down payment on a bigger house, the private school for their yet-to-be-conceived children, the comfortable retirement, evaporating. They had never once asked if I was happy. They had never once apologized for their cruelty. Their concern began and ended with the disposition of my estate. I never responded. My silence was not born of spite, but of clarity. I had grieved the loss of the son I thought I had, and I had moved on. My life was no longer about preserving a legacy for someone who saw me as its custodian. My life was my own. Arthur and I have everything we need. He is my partner, my love, my family. Sometimes, as we sit on our porch watching the lobster boats come in, I think about the term Mark used, gold digger. In his cynical, transactional world, that was the only possible explanation for Arthur's love. Mark's accusation was intended to be an insult, a weapon to control me. But in the end, it became a strange kind of gift. It revealed the truth of his own heart and, in doing so, freed me to follow mine. Mark wanted to inherit my wealth. Instead, I bequeathed it to the man who had helped me find the one thing money could never buy, a true and joyful life. Arthur didn't dig for my gold. He unearthed my soul. And that is an inheritance beyond measure.